Louisiana's youngest students and how they learn is mired in controversy again after the state's top school board voted to take another look at new learning standards. Now, these are standards that they have approved twice and as recently as a month ago. It's very much on the radar of Barry Irwin, president of Council for a Better Louisiana. Barry, first, what are the new learning standards that we're talking about here?
Well, first, they're an update on standards that we already have in place that were put in place about 10 years ago. And really what that means is even for our youngest kids, and I'm talking about birth to age 5,
Right.
kids who are, in child care centers or in daycare or whatever it is like that, we still have standards to try and help the educators, the caregivers, help them develop in those very early stages. So what we're talking about is not reading, writing, arithmetic, but we are talking about things like making sure at certain ages kids are developing appropriately. So for instance, maybe at an early age, a child does recognize some colors or some shapes. Later on, maybe numbers or letters, maybe beginning to say words. There's kind of a phased period, throughout that developmental process where we try and make sure those kids are on track. And that's what we're talking about.
Early childhood education, that's the biggest concern in Louisiana.
Sure.
That's where the problems begin. Is this somehow politicized? Or are they concerned about instruction?
It has been to some degree. For some folks, for actually a lot of folks, there's really no controversy here whatsoever. These are standards that have been very much in place, an earlier version, for a decade here, and we're just kind of updating those things. It uses science, it uses evidence-based research, those types of things, and it makes just common sense. However, within the standards that we're talking about, there's some terminology that's used. It's called social emotional development. And for certain groups and certain parents, that's kind of a flag, a red flag and a buzzword that gives them concern that maybe it's not just what I'm teaching a kid to, deal with colors and letters and shapes, but maybe it's like an open door to seep into things like gender identity, racial, discussions, that type of thing that they feel are inappropriate for kids at that age. So that's kind of where the controversy is.
I mean, these are babies. This is like child care. I don't even think of it as school, but it is.
Right.
I don't see what the confusion really would be if what you're doing is helping them develop, which is something that their parents would be doing if they were at home with their parents.
It's hard to see that for me in the same way, and I would say for transparency's sake, CABL has supported these standards and we think they're very strong. However, we've seen this played out at the upper grades already with things like critical race theory,
Exactly.
how American history and social studies are taught, controversies there, even library books on the shelves in libraries. We're seeing that already in that part of the educational system, and now it's kind of seeping down into those very early ages. I think a lot of these parents are maybe not necessarily afraid they're going to get totally indoctrinated, at birth to age 5, but they do worry about some vagueness that they feel like opens the door for some things that they don't think they want their kids to learn at that age.
And we're finding the public comment is a huge influencer here because that's really what has triggered this taking a look at it again.
That's right. We had a task force that began looking at these things more than a year ago. They spent a full year actually going around the state to some degree with a lot of different open meetings going through these. And we're talking about experts in the field, child care providers here in our state, higher ed people here in our state. So this is not out-of-state people that are coming in telling us what to do. But after the standards were, recommended by this task force, some groups began to look at them and say, I'm not so sure about this. And so they opened an online portal for comments and, they got inundated with, I think, 600 or so comments that raised some concerns.
I'm wondering, it seems like when you're teaching this, there is right and there's wrong. There's very basic things that you would have taught 500 years ago, 1,000 years ago, and you'll teach 100 years from now. Some of the basics, I don't see those really changing, and it seems that that's what is being taught here.
Well, if you look at the standards themselves, and if you're a parent or have been a parent at all, anytime in your life, you look at those things, you're going to say, hey, yeah, I know exactly what they're talking about. I did this with my child. I did that with my child, whatever. They are the very basic things. But there is a concern, some people call it the culture wars, whatever term you want to use, that, there's that schools in particular, and now we're talking about child care centers, might be, introducing some concepts and some thoughts at ages that some families don't feel like are appropriate. Now, I will say this, it's not the majority of people in our state. It's a very vocal an active minority, but it does, cause some political heartburn for maybe some BESE members and some legislators, and so that's why we're kind of going through this again.
And those being hurt right now are the little kids themselves.
Well, right. We do have standards in place, but the key is we review them every so many years because we want to make sure they're updated with the best evidence that the research has, and that's kind of what these new standards do. Is they don't make drastic changes, but they give us the most updated best practices, if you will, for how we can help kids at these early stages develop. And so we certainly want those to be in place as soon as we can.
All right, we're happy that your eyes are on it.
We're keeping an eye.
All right, thanks so much, Barry. Appreciate
All right,
it.
good to see you.